So now introducing our keynote speaker. When I said before, science meets policy, Dr. Ilaria Capua is sort of the personification of this. Being a veterinarian and a virologist, Dr. Capua is a very distinguished a scientist and has received several awards for her work. Most memorable is her advocacy for the sharing of genetic information of, in particular, avian flu and H5N1 viruses, both across disciplines and across countries. She is currently on leave as director of the comparative biomedical science at the Istituto Profilattico Sperimentale delle Venezie. And she was the director until she was elected for Italy's parliament, where she is sitting right now. And I really appreciate that she took the time to give us the keynote lecture here with the topic, Close Encounter of the Third Kind. Ilaria, we are very curious for your talk.
So good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Is the mic switched on? Yes. I was told before we can put it on and we'll switch off the music. So as long as you don't hear music and you hear my voice. So if I can have my first slide. I am going to talk to you this morning about close encounters of the third kind. I don't know how many of you remember this movie. I certainly do. But I will speak to you about different close encounters of the third kind. I will talk to you about encounters that pathogens experience with human beings. And I will talk to you about encounters that human beings have with human beings. So if, let's say, we want to classify encounters, close encounters of the first kind between people, which are carried out by pathogens, can spread diseases. And I dug out of some old library these pictures. You see already, she may look clean, but spread syphilis and gonorrhea. Be careful about what you're doing. And certainly we've evolved after that with HIV. And already in the 40s, you were warned about coughs and sneezes spread diseases, which also makes a nice little poem. And these, I think, we can classify as encounters of the first kind. Close encounters of the second kind are encounters that pathogens experience between animals. And we know that with the farming systems we have nowadays, you only need one virus to get into one of these farms, and these are virtually, if the animals aren't vaccinated, they're all going to get infected. I would just like to point out, unfortunately there isn't a pointer, but the bottom right picture, anybody know what that is? Those are dogs in China, these here. So there are, let's say, groupings and farmings of animals that, as Europeans, we were not particularly familiar with. And close encounters of the third kind are those that occur between, through pathogens that are present in animals and are able to infect people. Now, the problem with these pathogens, as we know from the recent Ebola outbreak that is all over the place and all over the news, and I will briefly talk about it from science to policy perspective later, is that with the mechanisms of globalizations, these encounters between pathogens moving from an animal to a human being can actually be spread worldwide through international transport and movement of all sorts of goods. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but my talk will focus on emerging infectious diseases, and particularly, as I said, on those diseases that have been shown to cause either pandemics, like the HIV/AIDS and like influenza, but also have caused some contained but very, very fearsome outbreaks, particularly for public health officials. So where's the problem? You see, as a politician now, I have to be very straight and identify exactly where the problem is. This is a very articulated and complex problem, but the problem number one is that we are growing in numbers. So the population of human beings on planet Earth is growing. And where is it growing? It's growing particularly in under-resourced countries in Asia and in Africa, and less in other parts of the world, of course, including Europe. Now, if a population is growing, what is a growing population going to want in the 21st century? It's going to want protein, and it's going to want animal proteins. So exactly in the same way that we Europeans, after the war, have been fed with growing amounts of protein, and we had the development of industrial farming, this is happening in other parts of the world as well. In the Far East, they want to have more meat, they want to have more fish, and they're not happy of living and growing their children on rice and cereals any longer. And how do these people grow their animals? There are industrial farms, but there aren't only industrial farms. There are types of farming which are completely different from the types of farming we have here. So these are ducks that are reared on a rice paddy in Thailand. And this is a story that everybody knows. I can't believe that you don't know about this story. So why do you raise ducks on a rice paddy? Because there is a synergy or a symbiosis between the ducks and the rice, which in the middle has a parasite. So the duck eats the parasite of the rice, and the duck gets fat. And the rice is healthier because it doesn't have the parasite. So that's how it works. It works perfectly well. However, you try and keep an infectious disease out of this setting. When in 2004, 2005, when H5N1 was the big hitter, you know, as vets, we were asked, okay, how do we control this infection in Asia? And I remember the medical community coming to speak to us and say, but can't you vaccinate those ducks? And I would say, but look, why don't you vaccinate them? Okay, that means you have to catch them one by one. Right, it's not the easiest thing in the world. Also, these types of farming include systems that are systems of rearing that are really, I would say, beyond our imagination under certain circumstances. So this picture was taken in Vietnam many years ago, in the middle of the H5N1 outbreak. And as you can see, the chickens are reared in the pigsty at another level. And although you can see a very efficient protective device to avoid the feces dropping into the pigsty, this is actually because chicken feces have a residual amount of energy and of protein, and the pigs just eat it. And this is, I would say, the perfect pandemic factory. And so you understand that, I mean, under these conditions, we can do a hell of a lot of talking here as scientists, but then it gets really, really difficult to try and manage these diseases at a local level and on a global scale. And we also know that these animals are farmed, and they're farmed for domestic or for local consumption, but they're also farmed to be exported. Now, it's been many years since I've been in Sweden. I feel really old. And this is before, well, last time I was here was before the, I would say, worldwide explosion of these steakhouses that we have all over Europe, where you get the steak from Argentina, you get the steak from Brazil, you get the steak from wherever part of the world you want. Do you have them up here? Do they exist? No? You only eat fish? Anyway, they're very popular in other places of the world. And if you go to a restaurant that is going to provide you with an Argentinian steak, and you're not in Argentina, that steak either comes from Argentina or you're being conned, you're being cheated. You're being given something which is not what you paid for. So this means that meat in enormous amounts moves around the world. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this map. I like to show it very much. These are the transcontinental routes of meat. Just to give you an idea of how much movement there is of meat around the world. And I would say the same is with fish and crustaceans, shrimps. Most of the shrimps come from Thailand. There's a shrimp expert who's nodding at me just now. Anyway, so this is what the world that we are living in. And here's a really difficult question for you. Anybody know what this is? Right, so your silence makes me understand that it's not immediately obvious, but can I have a pointer? Do we have a pointer? No. Do we have a pointer? No. So I can point like this. So anyway, these are the boats in the sea now. And what I wanted to point at you was, you see on top of Madagascar there's no boats. You wonder why? Because of pirates, exactly. Exactly. So anyway, this gives you an idea of how many boats are carrying products, are carrying food, are carrying everything that we eat, that we have in our house, that we basically share our lives with. And I think it's quite clear to understand that we're never going to stop this. Right. Takes quite an effort. I'm Italian, and I like the food that we get in Italy, and this morning I struggled very much to get a decent Italian coffee, which I got in the speaker's room. And as you know, food habits and what you're used to and what you've grown up with are habits that are really, really difficult to get rid of. And this happens for every culture. Italian immigrants at the beginning of the last century were traveling to the United States on Ellis Island with their sausages and with their pasta and with their tomatoes. And nowadays, Chinese immigrants and immigrants coming from other parts of the world like to carry with them the stuff that they like to eat. And a lot of that stuff isn't really doesn't have a legislation behind it in Europe, because does anybody in Europe eat fried chicken legs? Not quite, but they're very, very much appreciated in Asia, and therefore there are lots of illegal consignments on those boats of food that is coming from other parts of the world and that isn't exactly legal in Europe. And this slide takes us a little bit towards Ebola. Apart from food consumption, which, may represent a risk for animal health or public health, like the chicken legs or other types of food, there are some quite, I would say, peculiar activities which go on in some parts of the world, and this includes the consumption of bush meat. Now, I'm not going to get into the consumption of bush meat, but what I want to say is that if you are to use bush meat or any product that comes from a primate for whatever use, because you want to eat it, because you need it for, you want to give it to someone as a gift, you want to use it in a ritual, it doesn't matter. What you have to do is you have to kill the monkey. And to kill that monkey, I promise you that they're not going to kill them with barbiturates, but they're going to kill them either with a gun or with a knife. And as you see on the right-hand side, that guy there is butchering a monkey with his older son behind him and his younger son, who are looking at how this operation is carried out. And of course, if you butcher a monkey, it is a little bit difficult that you're not going to get in contact with blood. And this, of course, takes us to the most recent concern that we have nowadays. And some other movements of involuntary movements of animals across the world also involve the smuggling of exotic animals. And I don't know how many of you remember, but the first case of H5N1 in Europe was actually linked to the smuggling of 2 of these hawk eagles, which were smuggled from Thailand into Brussels, actually. Why? Because this guy wanted to give his brother or his cousin a gift. So what did he think? Why don't I get him 2 hawk eagles? And so he put the 2 hawk eagles in a basket and put them in his carry-on luggage. And what happened was that the dogs that are at the airport, mainly to identify drug dealers, actually smelled something very interesting in that luggage. And it wasn't drugs, but it was, there were these 2 eagles. Okay, so it's not only animals, it's through plants as well. And this is the land of IKEA. So Mr. IKEA, if I don't get out of Sweden, you better come and save me, okay? I'm going to say something which is not very popular. So these plants that are grown in East Asia that are supposed to be bamboo, they're not bamboo, but this is a side issue. And they're supposed to bring like happiness in your household, yeah? You know, you ladies know what I'm talking, young ladies know what I'm talking about. You never know, you get wrong husband, but you get one of these, you're sorted out. Right, so basically these plants are imported in like millions from Asia. And how are they imported? They're imported in containers. So they're harvested in Asia, they're imported in containers. And for those young ladies who were giggling before, when you buy these plants, they have, what do they have with them? What do you get with them? You get a little test tube, which keeps the roots nice and humid, because or else they're going to die. I mean, it's a long trip from Asia to here. And guess what's in that little water? Lots of stuff, like really lots of stuff. But what we're most concerned with is that when you open those containers, this is what you get, because there's larvae of insects that during the transport they mature and they then fly out as adult insects. And we know, so if Andrea, if I don't get out of here, and because Mr. IKEA is crucifying me, you please come and get me, at least give me a coffee before I die. And of course, these insects carry diseases, but they carry really themselves. And by carrying themselves, they are vectors, and they can they can actually become competent vectors to diseases that are present in a given territory. So I will just give you a few examples about viral zoonoses and globalization. And by the way, just to give you an idea, so you see the little kid licking the pig. That did not happen in Southeast Asia or in Africa, yeah? It happened in Europe. And you see that guy with the red hat. So what he's doing, this was a picture taken in Vietnam. And we were challenged with this question. So is H5N1 a foodborne infection? And the answer is no. It's not a foodborne infection. But that guy over there is preparing a duck blood pudding. And what they do is they bleed the ducks and they collect the blood. And then it is served lukewarm to men to enhance some capabilities. So when I'm asked, is influenza a foodborne infection, I would say not for women. Thank you. Just in case, this is the guy I'm talking about. Right, so is it a foodborne infection? No, but of course, if you eat freshly clotted, lukewarm blood, can it be, and the duck is viremic, can it be a foodborne infection? Risk zero doesn't exist, we all know. So I have prepared this classification on emerging infectious diseases because and now I'm a politician, and we have to put things into boxes so that politicians can understand what we're talking about. So an emerging infection disease this is a new classification for you, okay? They can be predictable, okay? We study, we learn, we understand, and we can predict some things. So, oh no, oh God. So for the non-vets, okay, in this room, this is a horse. Okay, now horses generally do not actually walk like that. And this is the first case of West Nile in Italy. And this was predictable. I mean, it's okay, we can deal with it. This is a cycle of West Nile. I don't need to teach you anything, but the reservoir is these little birds. Insects feed on the birds, and then they bite people and horses, and that's what you get. And you get a similar condition in people, not very many people, thankfully. So why was it predictable? This is the distribution of the vector. And you know what? I went on the web, and I looked for Culex pipiens distribution, and this is the only map I found. So if there's any entomologist in this room, like, can we do something about it and put a better map? I mean, this looks as if it was done in the 50s or something. I couldn't find anything better. So, okay, this is the global distribution. Is this a predictable disease? Yeah. So I got these slides from the CDC. I spent some time there when I was young in 2009. And actually, I think that this set of slides is really good, especially if you show them in the way that I'm going to show you. So here's the clock, okay? Here's time. You know that West Nile was introduced in the United States in year 2000. And I get asked as a virologist, as a politician, as half a magician, like, are we going to be able to stop West Nile in Italy because we had West Nile? And I say, wait a minute. Me show you what Americans did with West Nile, okay? Because Americans, they are the champions. 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008. So when they asked me, are we going to be able to stop West Nile? I mean, the Americans didn't stop it. Do you really think that we are going to stop it? Okay. Second level is rather predictable. Some of these emerging diseases are rather predictable. And these include my favorite pathogens, influenza pandemics. And I won't spend an hour and a half on this, but I will highlight just a few things. So why are they rather predictable? What do we know about these viruses? We know that they originate either entirely or part of their genome originates from animal viruses, and this is what causes a pandemic. When the whole world was looking at swine flu, at bird flu, and everybody was pointing in that direction, Mother Nature said, surprise, surprise, we had swine flu. And this virus is, of course, a harlequin of the globalized world. So he is the personification and incarnation? No, that's a flower. Anyway, it is like, it's the proof, the existing proof of globalization of infectious diseases, because this virus had 6 genes coming from the North American lineage and 2 genes coming from the Eurasian lineage, which means that an Asian virus and a North American virus met in the same cell at one point in their life and generated a progeny of viruses that had a genetic component from Asia and a genetic component from North America. So, I don't know if anybody of you can remember the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which I think was an absolute genius movie. But anyway, you always have to think about the Greek root of words. So was it a pandemic? And I think that I am preaching to the choir again. I don't think I have to convince you, but pandemic, there was a major misunderstanding on whether this was a pandemic with the general public, because pandemic does not mean it's going to kill millions of people. It means it's going to infect millions of people. And I think that organizations like ECDC should really, really push and make sure that people understand what we mean by pandemic. Was it a pandemic? I don't think I need to convince anyone in here. There's your clock. Up there, same, right, up there, 27 April, 27 May, 1st July, 31st July, 20 September, 29 November, January, April, August. Was it a pandemic? Yes. Did it kill millions and millions of people? Thankfully, no, I add. Because if this virus had been as aggressive as it could have been, we would have all been in a big, big trouble. A few words on H5N1, just because I like it. Here it is. This is the spread there was in animals at the time, and this was a major concern because it was killing hundreds of millions of birds due to several practices like the one we saw, like children handling poultry and so on, and all sorts of funny things that happen in the world. We had some human cases, which of course exactly overlapped the areas in which we had the animal diseases, and fortunately this pandemic never took off. Now we move to diseases that are quite unpredictable. I don't know how many of you have heard about monkeypox. So monkeypox is a really nasty disease. It's present in Congo, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and monkeypox has a story that our American colleagues here will know about. Many years ago, it was decided to increase the variety of pets that American children could choose from. And so somebody came up and said, so why don't we provide pet shops with Gambian rats? Look, they have a horrible name, but they're actually not that ugly. So what they did was they paid some hunters or some people to go and catch these Gambian rats. These were imported into the US legally. They were brought into pet shops. Look, you see, it's not that ugly. It's okay. He's like a big hamster. And I think that he's, you know, quite smart as well, maybe. I mean, I don't know what this lady's doing with him. But anyway, they were kept in these pet shops. Some of them were sold, and but not all of them were sold. The American child didn't really like them. So what did they do? What do you do with an exotic animal that nobody wants? You release them. You can't sell them, so what do? You release them into the wild. And what happened was that these Gambian rats infected prairie dogs. And as you know, in the United States, there's lots of these animals that are present in parks, and they're actually friendly, and you feed them, and you go near them, and you can play with them. And this is what happened. We had an outbreak of monkeypox right in the middle of the United States. Then we have diseases that are very surprising. And among these, this is the superstar. Now, who would have ever imagined that human beings could have, apart from the fact that this guy's nose is quite similar to the camel's nose, but who would have ever imagined that we could have contracted a disease from camels? No, camels. I mean, nature is really surprising at camels. Okay, so what's the story about this MERS coronavirus? Bats. There they are. They're all over the place. They are our enemy number one. Bats are the reservoir. They infect camels. And camels can infect through a variety of different means human beings. Okay, I'm not going to go into the detail of this, but anyway, so we have bats, camels, and humans, and we still haven't understood a lot about this disease. What I can say is that in April this year, there was a sharp increase of outbreaks, while these had been the outbreaks over the past year or so. And so we still have a lot to learn. And again, air travel has caused spread of the disease. Thankfully, it hasn't spread that much human to human, at least internationally, while we have big outbreaks in the area in which it emerged. And of course, it even arrived in the United States. So, you know, you can't really make any statement about we're safe, because this is not going to happen to us. And then there are some emerging infectious diseases that are surreal, where reality is beyond imagination. And this, I think, comments itself by itself, this slide. So this lady, who doesn't look very smart, what she did was she put a snake to play with a 3-year-old baby. A 3-month-old baby. Now, I'm a mother. Now, come on. It wasn't a play snake. It wasn't an IKEA snake. It was a real snake. And the baby, of course, got salmonella. And Mrs. Rye said, she had no idea what was wrong with her baby. Baby could have been stritulated or killed by the snake. I mean, why would you do something like that? Okay, so this is what we are working with when we're working with emerging infectious diseases. And as scientists, as people who are involved with managing these diseases, we have, I think, a very big responsibility, because these diseases can spread. They can spread all over the world, and you can find them in your back garden tomorrow morning. So what can we do? Andrea briefly mentioned this, and I really don't want to get into any detail, but I put myself in a gigantic mess in 2006. My lab is an international lab for flu and for other diseases, and for avian flu. And we had we received a phone call from a Nigerian colleague, whom I always like to acknowledge, Tony Johannes and Mrs. Lombin, his boss. And they said, look, we have the first African bird flu isolate. Can you look at it for us? And I said, of course. And so when we received it, we looked for it, and like the whole world was looking, all the flu scientific community was looking at this virus. And I was asked by the WHO once I sequenced it, there was a password-protected database to which only 15 labs around the world had access. And I was asked to put it in this database, and I said no. I said, look, here we are facing a potentially gigantic risk for public health, and I think that we need to start sharing this information, because what is in that genetic sequence can be useful to understand more about the virus, to understand how pathogenic it is, to understand if it's what diagnostics we can produce, what vaccines we can produce. And so I put myself really in a big, big mess. In fact, you see what a nice portrait I got by the Wall Street Journal. So Italians do so much to try and look fashionable, and that's what you get on the Wall Street Journal. Anyway, so the time was right. The message made sense, and so after, I have to say that FAO and OIE, OIE is the World Organization for Animal Health, and FAO is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, they immediately understood the importance of this, and they endorsed it. The World Health Organization, already in 2009, and then in 2011, because they had to find consensus between the member states and all the rest, actually endorsed this, and now it is really a common practice to share information. I mean, could you imagine in the middle of the Ebola outbreak, okay, we have an outbreak in Liberia and an outbreak in the States. Can you give me the Liberian sequence? Doesn't make sense, right? So now we're actually beyond, and we are in a completely new dimension. And I would really, and I discovered that there is this EVA initiative, which is a European virus archive, which is funded by the European Union, and where you can get all sorts of reagents and all sorts of information of viruses that you're working on. And this was, I would say, surreal in 2000. An idea like this would have been surreal in 2006 when I put myself in that mess. But now I see that things are moving in that direction, and I am particularly honored and proud of having ignited that discussion. Right. So, things change in life. And what I'm going to do now is not a striptease, because it's too early in the morning. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to step into somebody else's shoes. Because now I'm not a scientist anymore. So I am. But I pretend I'm not. Because in February 2014, this guy here, who was the prime minister at the time, and I would really like you to notice something. This was in Nature, and it says, Italian Prime Minister Mario Monti left. Just in case anybody thought that I was the prime minister. Phoned me up and said, look, so I'm going to cut this story short. But anyway, phoned me up and said, would you be willing to run for elections? And for a series of reasons that I'm not going to get into that detail, I said, why not? And the main reason was, we always complain, Italians are really good at complaining, and we always complain about how things don't work in our country. And so it's easy to complain, and not do anything about it. And so if the former prime minister, who's a rather credible guy for anybody who's known what he's done in his mandates as a European commissioner, certainly more credible than the politicians we've had in the past, says, do you want to do something for your country? And you say no, then you shouldn't complain. And so I said, okay, I'm on it. Right. This is like really difficult. So this is what happens when I started. I was clueless. I didn't know where to start from. You don't know how Parliament works. You don't understand what people are saying. You don't understand anything. Then you sort of get naively confident and you say, I can do this. Then you become discouragingly realistic, and that's the phase I'm in right now, because you say, okay, this is way too big for me to do anything. And then you know it. So I am here. There, okay? Just so that you understand my state of mind. And now, this is serious. And I've taken this phrase by Galileo because I think that it really applies to a scientific community which needs to be involved in policy. Nature is implacable and unalterable and quite, and this is the important bit, quite indifferent to whether she's comprehensible to us or not. But actually, as an international scientific community, we have a responsibility, and we have the responsibility of generating data that policymakers can work on. But is this enough? And I don't think it's enough. And now that I'm on the other side, I have my new shoes, it's definitely not enough. Because we need to maintain political interest for a series of reasons, primarily to secure funding, okay? And things like this, where we are considered the scientists that go on about their own stuff, that only understand their little world, and that are probably fabricating viruses in their labs, and they're probably acting as bioterrorists, or God knows what we're doing. This is what a lot of stakeholders say and think, except when you have a big problem and then they all run towards the scientists. And so the second part of my talk is going to be about another type of close encounters, which is close encounters between people. And I think that the scientific community has done a lot in engaging the public. We have lots of meetings now to make the general public aware of aspects of science that before were not even considered by the general public. We have close encounters of the second kind, scientists to scientists, like this meeting, like many other meetings, where we try and cross-fertilize each other, coming from different disciplines. We try to make friends, we try to create networks, and these are extremely important. What is missing is, at least this is what I see, is this. Does anybody in this room know who these two people are? But no one. Zero. Okay, I'll give you a hint. They work for the Commission. Right. So these two guys here are the new commissioners. Okay, it was a difficult question because the new commission has just been, they're actually only started 3 or 4 days ago. But these two guys here are the Commissioner for Health and the Commissioner for Research. And does anybody know the names? Because you're Lithuanian. Yes. You see? I'm smart. She's Lithuanian. Please? Vitus Andriukaitis. So I looked it up. I had it written down, but I would have never pronounced it in this way. For health. Anybody know about the name of this? No Portuguese in here? Moedas, very well. I think that they should be shortlisted for the prize. Okay, so this is the ECDC conference and European Center for Disease Control, and 2 people, let's say 10 people in the room, we have shy people as well, know who these people are. This is not a good performance. Why? Because these people give you funding, they give you direction, and they give you strategy. That's why you need to interact with them. That's why you need to have people who can interact with them and speak their language. I think this speaks by itself. So I have been presenting interrogations in Parliament on several issues related to science and to virology. You know who was there? No one. No one. Look. There's one. So this is where the government sits. And like there's one person asking the Italian government, what are you going to do about Ebola? Okay? Me. Full stop. There's no one there. No one. So this is the interest that politicians have in science. And this is not like science astrophysics. This is science like diseases that you could get tomorrow morning. Okay? Now, the source of information that politicians use to make their educated decisions, this is source of information 1. You can always recognize a politician because they have at least 5 newspapers which they carry under their arm. This is their distinctive trait. Their source of information 2 is their constituency. It does not matter what the constituency says, but they listen to people who have elected them because they are interested in what people want from them. And source of information 3 is also, I would say, anything that rotates around the conspiracy theory. And because every politician wants to look clean and wants to look like I'm going to save the world. And so they are very, very attentive to this type of information. And of course, the web. You can find any information, apart from the distribution of Culex pipiens, you can find anything on the web. And often you read the first, if you're a politician, because you don't have time, you read the first or the second, alert that you get. And I focused on, I'm sure you know about this Tamiflu issue, which happened in spring, where BBC says millions wasted on flu drug, claims major report. Tamiflu, Britain spent 424 million on a drug that shortens bouts but is no cure. And then you have a terrifying history of viruses escaping from labs. In the 70s, the Chinese pandemic was a lab mistake. And then you have 2,000 vials that disappear from the Pasteur Institute, and they had SARS in it. And then you have the gain-of-function experiments. Scientists in the lab are making dangerous viruses that if they escape, they're going to kill all of you. And then, in the little corner, the battle to discover new antibiotics. Like, by the way, we don't have any antibiotics, so if you get an infection, we're not going to be able to cure you. And the real information and the relevant information actually gets lost in the noise. And let me tell you, I can tell you, because I know these people, these are like, they're not smart, okay? They don't get things immediately. We need to give them short, simple messages that they can understand without burning too much energy. And what I think happens is that we go 1 step forward and 3 steps backwards. Because on one hand, we say, oh, the flu, we have to be careful, we have to protect, we have to buy Tamiflu. And then we say, oops, we spend so much on Tamiflu and it doesn't work. Ah, well, so what? And I'd really like to commend Wendy Barkley. Anybody who knows her, please bring my words to her. She actually stood up in front of the BBC and she said, no, look, Tamiflu is all we had. And when you don't know what's going to happen, you need to use what you have. And actually, she was strong and brave enough to stand up in front of the press and say this. So what are we selling? What are we, like you, that are scientists now, what are we selling? We are selling a hazard, a risk, a threat. We're not selling anything which has immediate consequences. And for emerging infectious diseases for which there's been an alarmistic media coverage, they are eventually perceived by the general public as a hoax. And then all the journalists point to the conspiracy theory. So I don't know if anyone was at the ESWI meeting in Riga like a couple of months ago, but I picked this up. This is the European Scientific Working Group on Influenza. And look at them. So these people are smart. They know what they're doing. They're talking about influenza. This is what I got from their advertisement. And the words that come more often are if, since, and, when, or. So, a new strain of bird flu has emerged in China and has caused 3 human deaths. Since H5N1 has emerged, more than 650 people have been hospitalized and 60% have died. H5N1 only needs a handful of mutations to become transmissible in the air. We are not selling anything. We are selling something that could happen in the future, and they need to worry about what's happening now. What are the objectives of a politician? First of all, be re-elected. This doesn't apply to me because I'm never going to do this again in my life. Second, keep away from scandals and controversies. Third, address issues which give them popularity. And we need to keep this in mind, or else we will never get their attention. And the bottom line is that resources are limited. They are pressurized by many, many, many interest groups. They want to put their money, in inverted commas, but not only in inverted commas, and attention on sure bets. And sure bets are impossible when you're working with emerging infectious diseases. So in general terms, an emerging infectious disease may be perceived as a major health issue, and it will attract attention, and it will attract funding. Or it cannot be perceived as a major health threat or lose the characteristics, and in that case, it will initially attract attention, funding will be made available, then hoax or conspiracy theory comes, funding is reduced, and you know what? Your credibility is shaken. Your credibility, not mine anymore, your credibility is shaken. And scientists, they actually at times like to shake their own credibility by themselves. And I admire this article, but if you translate it into what a policymaker can understand, it doesn't help. So this article here says, is this much ado about nothing? And says, look, I think this may be animated. No, it's not. So look, H5N1, we've had 18 publications per death. Okay, number of cases, number of deaths, number of publications per death. So just to summarize, TB Beijing Claude, number of deaths, 180,000. Number of publications, 856. This is the number of publications per death. So are we not putting too much energy and too much attention into diseases that really don't have an impact? And we have to defend this, because if we don't, then we'll just be blown away. So very briefly, how can we as Europeans secure funding and attention for emerging infectious diseases? This is a very interesting document which I downloaded from the web, and it comes from the US government. And basically what they do, so they say it's not only the deaths, but it's the related costs or associated costs to an emerging infectious disease. And let's just think of Australia closing the flights from Africa. That's enough to make any air company, and air companies are powerful, really think about how we should manage these diseases. So SARS, although not very many people were killed, the estimated cost was 30 to 100 billion. And recently, the CDC has announced a partnership with the Department of Defense, with which they've worked for a very, very long period of time on the global health security agenda, convincing, rightly so, the American citizen, the American taxpayer, and the American voter that controlling diseases outside the US is essential for the health and security of the American citizen. And look at where the Americans get their money from. Look at that. This is the Department of Defense. That's where they get funding. But in Europe, we don't have a Department of Defense. So what are we going to do? Start crying and complaining? No. We need to plug into European framework policies, immigration policies. How many of you have been asked? So in Italy, we have this big problem about migrants coming from Northern Africa. Right, you know what I'm talking about, right. So how many people have you been asked, what is the chance of Ebola coming to Italy with migrants? I get this asked about 5 times a day. Burden on health services, equality of EU citizens. Why should a citizen living in one country be more at risk in one member state than a citizen living in another country with reference to an emerging infectious diseases? And scientific excellence. Europe is very proud of its scientific excellence, and there's the new Horizon program and so on and so forth. And we can plug in our areas of interest into being excellent and delivering information and knowledge around the world. So this is my take-home. I'm actually even on time. So this is my take-home message for you guys. Agree on a few simple, okay? Simple take-home messages for politicians. Be prepared to manage conspiracy or hoax journalistic interpretations. Somebody's going to come up and say, these people made money out of Ebola vaccine, which doesn't exist. Because this company was of the brother of the sister of the grandmother of so-and-so who was a politician, and therefore it shouldn't have been used to cure Ebola patients. So, I mean, get ready, because this is going to come. This is how that world works. Stop thinking that the scientific community does not need to interact with politicians, like you should not be saying, it's not my job, somebody else is going to do it, because nobody's going to do it for you. It's your problem. And please understand that you are a scientist, and that scientists do tend to sort of think that they're going to save the world. And they are going to save the world, but they're not going to save the world by themselves. They need political will to move things forward. So in my revised vision of One Health, see, this is somebody know who this is? Tonio Borg. This is the old commissioner for health. So in our new vision for One Health, you have to bear in mind that it's animals and people and everything, the environment, but it's also the news, communication, meetings, politicians, and the political environment as a whole. And this takes me to my last slide, and this is really what you have to keep in your mind. It is our problem, and the only thing worse than being blind is having sight and no vision. Thank you very much. So we go there?
No.
No?
I think you can stay here.
We can stay
Don't
here.
you?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't mind.
So, Thank you very much for this very thought-stimulating talk, and I think it fits perfectly in the experiment number 1 that we want to do in this conference. So since you were so much on time, we have also time for some questions.
Okay, you want me to test you on names of other commissioners?
No, Darina has a question. Can somebody please put the microphone to Darina here?
Thanks very much. Is it on?
Yeah.
Thanks very much. I really enjoyed your talk. Can I ask you, I agree that when all of these new emerging crises come out, infectious diseases crisis, we go through this phase when initially the scientific community may be aware of it, and we're trying to raise awareness, and then what happens is the media catch up, and then it's suddenly panic, and nobody's doing enough, and you're not doing enough. And then we get over the crisis, and then they accuse, as you rightly say, saying, oh, you hyped it all up, it was, And we know that's happening, and yet how can we we know the phases that it's going to go through, and yet we're powerless. When we're probably a lot of us at the stage now when many countries are saying, well, you're not doing enough to prepare us, we're not prepared, but you just have to go with it. I mean, have you any advice as to how we can interact when we're at the stage when there is too much concern?
Well, as you say, it's not just only when there's too much concern, there's also it's a developing curve. And I think that obviously the system that we have been using up to now hasn't worked very well. In that, the communication strategies, because also, ECDC might say one thing and somebody else says and another organization or scientific society says something different, and then you get in trouble. One thing that I particularly was impressed with when I was at the CDC in the States was that, so this was 2009. I'd gone there to take a sabbatical from flu, and it's when H1N1 emerged, so sorry, you're going to do flu, okay. Was that they actually had journalists that were coming to train at the CDC on issues related to flu, to make them really understand. Because, so I don't know much about other diseases. I know a bit about flu, but flu is like really difficult. It's like, so H5N1, H1N1, and A, the human has, and these people need to understand. And so, I don't know, but like with this Ebola crisis, do you have here as the ECDC or any other society, do you have selected opinion leaders working in the communications field, coming to train and understand certain critical aspects of the emergence of disease? I don't know, this is a question, but this could be something to be done. I mean, if you wait for journalists to come and speak to you, you get who you get, and you get people saying, look, I'm not a science journalist, but I need to write this. Okay, good luck, right? You get what you get. You get people that have their own opinion and that might want to push their opinion into what you're saying. Instead, if we are proactive and we interact with the press and with opinion leaders, and we prepare them and we make them understand that, for example, we don't have all the answers. We don't have all the answers, but we're working towards this. The Commission is working towards it, and we're putting money into it, and this is what is being done. Then maybe things could change. It's not going to happen tomorrow morning. It's going to take time, because this is a cultural issue, and people need to, get used to it, need to learn how to speak to journalists. Journalists need to understand what they're hearing, and so on. But being proactive and understanding that you cannot ignore that part of the world, I think is essential nowadays with Twitter and and you know, all the social media.
Okay, I mean, we have actually been doing these press seminars for invited journalists from especially the agencies that spread the articles to several newspapers, both at ECDC but also in my previous workplace at the Robert Koch Institute in Germany. And actually, in Germany, we gave it up because there was so much turnover that once you have sort of created a certain understanding in journalists, they move somewhere else. And that's. But I fully agree. I mean, that is something that was a experience at one time, and then we have to see how we deal with this. There was one more question. Yeah, Corey.
Thank you. I also enjoyed your talk very much. It was very smart and very entertaining at the same time. So thank you.
You would have fallen asleep. I wouldn't want all the foreigners to fall asleep this time of the morning.
No, it's more of a commentary because the press don't have any deadlines anymore, or there is a deadline every 30 seconds, which means that the time to do research is 30 seconds. So the old concept of having a science journalist who can sit and understand a problem and have a good time, say a couple of weeks to do research and talk with various scientists, that's over. Because with the electronic media, there's a deadline every 30 seconds, which means that we as scientists have to write things differently than we used before, because the way that we put our findings and present our ideas and recommendations should be in a way that it can be copy-pasted into the media, because they don't have any time or resources to digest it. The number of journalists per news item is dramatically decreasing because of the financial situation in the media world and this deadline that is everywhere. So we have to think much more in the way that we want to put our messages in the public. So we are not writing for scientific papers anymore only. We are also writing for the general public, and that should be as important as so we need to think differently. And also, this is a suggestion, why don't we invite journalists for an EPID training, a full EPID training? I mean, that's what they do at CDC. They invite journalists to take EIS, which means that we have people in the media that have a fundamental understanding on how we work. So that's just an idea.
Then they go to a public health institute.
No, but I agree with you, and I think that. But we need to be determined, and we need to be forceful. And if ECDC stands up and says, we need 5 journalists from these countries to come here and spend 3 days with us so that we can explain Ebola or whatever, right? I don't think that they're going to get no turn-ups. I mean, I think that somebody's going to turn up. And I think that it can be done. It is, as you say, the number of journalists is decreasing. The system is going through a crisis, and I understand. So I fully take your comment. And I don't know if any of you have looked on the WHO website. There's now these little pills, I call them, or they're like little squares with which you can tweet about Ebola. So if you wash your hands as much as you can, or keep away from people that have fever, or basic information. And that is something else I think that needs to be developed more. Certainly we need more heads, more brains thinking about how we can get the right message to the press so that the press passes it on to the political environment, and then they can allocate resources hopefully to us.
Okay, so thank you very much. I don't see any. One more, the last one. Short, please.
It's actually just a comment rather than a question from Public Health England. In the UK, there's a British Science Media Association, and they run a fellowship every year for scientists to be embedded in media outlets like newspapers or the BBC. It's just a short few weeks every summer, about 6-week program. It would be interesting to know if that could be replicated across Europe, perhaps.
But do you see a different?
I think it helps people. I know quite a few public health professionals who've done it, and so it gives them a much greater understanding of what journalists actually need from us.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a two-way. I mean, it's as usual. It's
So Ilaria will stay with us for at least the morning, and so if you have more questions, I think
you can
will be
catch
open.
me
You
while
can
I'm having
catch her.
Nespresso coffee.
Exactly. So, and that's the
Because
keyword
George
now.
Clooney takes it, not because
no,
it's
no,
nice.
no, no.
I'm joking.
So,
Okay, thank you.
That's the keyword. We have now a coffee break until 11 and come back then to the parallel sessions after the coffee break. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much.